Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's cozy journey, 2 hours of Pokémon adventures you forgot about, Sleep Edition. I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight?
And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments down below. I swear there's nothing more magical than seeing how far this sleepy little Pokémon village stretches. Some of you are in pajamas by 8 p.m. Others? Well, you're watching this at 4 in the morning with one eye open and a half-eaten cookie on your chest. Hey, no judgment. This is a safe, soft space. So go ahead. Lights low, blankets up. Maybe you've got a plushie or two tucked in nearby. Let's get cozy. Let's go back to the stories you forgot you remembered. Not gym battles, not rival showdowns. Just the peaceful moments in between. The side paths, the sleepy scenes, the quiet magic of Pokémon, and our first adventure. Well, it starts with a butterfree wing and one very curious little Pikachu. You'd think getting lost would be a stressful thing, but honestly, for Pikachu, it was kind of the perfect little vacation. No trainers yelling about type advantages, no gym leaders demanding rematches, and not even Team Rocket hiding in a bush with a butterfly. Net and a new, weirdly poetic plan.
Just peace. And maybe the occasional leaf falling dramatically like it was auditioning for a forest-themed musical. Pikachu stretched out, rolled onto his back, and watched the sunlight filter through the leaves. For a moment, he thought about staying there forever. Just him, the moss, and that oddish pretending to be a rock. But then his stomach let out a dramatic growl that could have woken a sleeping Snorlax. And he remembered that adventure is fun, but snacks are critical. So, Pikachu stood up, sniffed around, and began a deeply unqualified quest for lunch. He sniffed a mushroom, not food. He poked a log, definitely not food. Something squirmed. Finally, he found a cluster of berries hanging like nature's vending machine. But of course, a grumpy-looking Spearow was already there, guarding them like it was getting paid by the hour. Pikachu tried a peaceful approach, smiling and wagging his tail like, "Hey, buddy, want to share?" The Spearow stared. Pikachu stepped back. The Spearow puffed up like a balloon full of attitude. So Pikachu did what any clever Pokémon would do. He flopped on his back and pretended to be asleep. Full performance. Fake snores, eyes closed, one leg twitching like he was having a dream about winning a trophy shaped like a ketchup bottle. The Spearow was either confused or just very uncomfortable because it dropped a berry next to Pikachu's. Head like, "Here, please leave me alone," and flew off. Pikachu peeked one eye open, grinned, and took the tiniest, smug little bite. Mission accomplished. After that, with a full belly and nowhere urgent to be, he wandered deeper into the forest until he found a perfect little hill, warm from the sun and blanketed in soft moss. He flopped down, tail curled, ears twitching gently with the breeze. Slowly, other Pokémon joined him, curious, quiet, half-asleep types. A Poliwag plopped down like a spiral-shaped pillow. A sleepy Metapod swung lazily from a nearby branch. Even an Exegcute rolled over like a bunch of yawns in a pile. Pikachu barely noticed. His eyes drifted shut, breath slow, belly full. The forest didn't ask him for anything. It was just peaceful. Meanwhile, somewhere, not too far away, Ash had finally noticed Pikachu was missing. He spun around in panic while Misty tried not to roll her eyes right out of her head. And Brock stirred the pot with the calm of someone who's been through this at least 6 times already. They packed up, quickly-ish, and began to follow the trail of tiny paw prints and berry peels left like little sleepy breadcrumbs. Ash called Pikachu's name into the forest, voice echoing between the trees. And somewhere in the distance, a Caterpie blinked awake, mildly annoyed. But Pikachu was already half dreaming, curled up in the moss, gently snoring while a butterfree fluttered. Above him like a dream that didn't need to be chased. He knew Ash would find him eventually, probably out of breath, possibly tripping over a tree root and definitely shouting something dramatic. But for now, in that quiet little corner of the woods, it was just him, his new nap buddies, and the warm sun above. No battles, no pokeballs, just rest. Back in the peaceful, mossy nook, Pikachu shifted slightly in his sleep, letting out the softest little squeak, the kind of noise you make when your dream just gave you an extra snack. His ears twitched as a gentle breeze moved through the trees like the forest was sighing. Around him, his impromptu napping crew had dozed off too. The pollywag was bubbling ever so slightly in its sleep. The metapod had not moved in an hour, though to be fair, that's just kind of its thing. And the execute group was lightly rolling with the rhythm of the earth, occasionally bumping into each other and then apologizing in unison, like 6 very polite eggs. Meanwhile, Ash was slowly spiraling into full trainer panic mode. He'd already convinced himself Pikachu had been stolen by a wild Fearow, adopted by a forest tribe of Sentret, or perhaps opened his own tea shop with a Togetic, and decided never to return. Misty, carrying Togepi like a tiny royalty, was surprisingly calm, mostly because she knew Pikachu's version of lost usually meant napping dramatically, somewhere picturesque. Brock, being the ever-prepared dad friend, had packed trail mix, canteens, a full lunch, and somehow a small camping stove. They followed the trail with practiced patience, passing a group of Bellsprout practicing synchronized stretching, and an Nidoran who looked like it had just lost a very intense staring contest with a mushroom. Ash kept shouting, "Pikachu!" every few minutes, like the forest would suddenly answer back with a megaphone. But the forest just continued doing what forests do, quiet, leafy, and full of tiny Pokémon minds going about their very chill business. Eventually, they stumbled upon a part of the woods that felt different, softer somehow, like the trees were tucking something in. The light was dimmer here, cozy, rather than the shadowy, and the air had that warm, sleepy feeling of a late afternoon nap. Misty held back a branch and smiled. There, curled up like a forest prince, was Pikachu, laying on the moss with a berry stem still dangling from his mouth and a metapod practically snuggling his tail. Ash stopped mid-yell. His arms dropped to his sides, and for a moment, even he knew not to shout. Instead, he tiptoed forward and just crouched beside his partner, brushing a little leaf from Pikachu's head. Pikachu stirred slightly, blinked one eye open, and gave the tiniest picker of greeting, like, "Oh, hey, took you long enough." No big reunion, no dramatic music swell, just the quiet kind of friendship that doesn't need words. Ash didn't even say anything. He just sat down next to him, leaned back against a tree, and let the silence wrap around them like a blanket. Misty sat a little ways off, feeding Togepi tiny bits of Brock's snack stash, and Brock set up his tiny portable kettle, because of course he did. No one rushed to move. Pikachu eventually climbed into Ash's lap and nestled there, blinking slowly, letting his full body nap continue where it left off. The forest seemed to sigh in agreement, the kind of place where nothing had to happen quickly or loudly or with a big dramatic sparkle. Just breathing and resting and existing together. Even Meowth, who had been spying from a tree branch, because of course he had, decided not to report back to Jesse and James. He just watched, blinked, and whispered to himself, "Honestly, not bad." And with that, even he curled up on the branch and dozed off, his tail swinging lazily like a drowsy pendulum, somewhere far away. Team Rocket was, arguing about kettle corn. But here in this tiny green pocket of the world, time didn't really matter. Pikachu didn't need to battle, Ash didn't need to win anything, and the rest of the world didn't need their attention. Just a nap, a friend, and the gentle hum of the forest, soft enough to carry them all the way to dreamland. Not many people know this, but Brock, the ever-reliable cook, caretaker, and eye-closer of hearts, has a secret. No, not as tragic. Habit of falling in love with every nurse Joy and Officer Jenny within a 10-mile radius. That's less of a secret and more of a hobby. No, Brock's real secret is nestled just beyond the edge of Pewter City, tucked away behind an old stone wall that most people mistake for ruins. There's not much to look at from the outside, just moss-covered rocks, a crooked gate, and vines that seem to have forgotten. They were supposed to grow upward. But inside, that's where the magic happens. Brock calls it his garden. Though honestly, garden barely covers it. This place is like a miniature world, quiet and hidden, where time doesn't rush, and even the wind seems to slow down and stretch its arms. There's a small pond shaped like a sideways heart, mostly by accident, and a winding trail of stepping stones that seem to appear and disappear, depending on how sleepy you are. He didn't build it for battling or for training, Pokémon, or even for growing ingredients, though yes, the tomatoes are suspiciously excellent. He built it because sometimes even rock-type gym leaders need somewhere soft. It started years ago, back when he was still figuring out how to cook rice without it becoming rice pudding. One afternoon, stressed after a very long week of gym challenges, spilled curry, and a golem that wouldn't stop trying to nap in the laundry pile, he wandered outside to breathe and noticed a gap in the rocks behind the house. He pushed through it on a whim, scraped his knee, muttered something dramatic about destiny, and stumbled into the overgrown, forgotten patch of land that would soon become his sanctuary. He cleared the weeds with the help of a very enthusiastic Geodude and a not-so-helpful Zubat, who mostly just got tangled in vines. Over time, he planted herbs, flowers, and berries, not for training, not for potions, just for the joy of watching things grow. And eventually, without really planning it, Pokémon started showing up. A couple of oddish at first, waddling around like planty little roommates. Then a Sunflora who refused to leave and insisted on facing east at exactly 6:07 a.m. every day. There was even a Ludicolo who appeared during a thunderstorm, danced once and vanished, forever, leaving behind only a muddy footprint and a strange feeling of having been politely entertained. Brock never advertised the place. He never bragged or showed it off. He just went there when he needed to slow down, sometimes with Ash and Misty, though they never really understood why he was so protective over this one quiet spot. He'd bring a blanket, a thermos of spicy tea, and sometimes a frying pan that somehow doubled as a pillow. And he'd sit there, not doing much, just breathing, maybe talking to the plants like they were old friends, which honestly they kind of were. One rose bush in particular seemed to lean toward him when he spoke, like it was nodding. Or maybe it just liked the smell of his curry. It's hard to say. But on one especially peaceful afternoon, Brock did something unusual. He brought someone new. It was May, of all people, cheerful, curious, and slightly suspicious. She'd asked where he disappeared to sometimes, and instead of brushing it off with a dramatic story about ancient rock, scrolls, or mysterious stew ingredients, he just smiled and said, "Want to see something cool?" So they walked quietly through the edge of the forest, past the rock wall, and through the garden gate. May expected a field or maybe a shed full of bonsai trees, but when she stepped inside, she actually stopped walking. Not because of any big, flashy thing, just because the air felt different. Softer, like the world had taken off its shoes. She looked around slowly, eyes wide, and said, "Brock, this is beautiful." Brock, who was poking at a basil plant like it had offended him, just gave a sheepish shrug and said, "It's not much, just a place to breathe." And that was the whole point. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about being the best, or catching the rarest Pokémon, or becoming a world-class breeder. It was just about stillness, about letting things grow without rushing, without pushing, about having one place in the world where nothing was expected of you except to be kind and maybe water the marigolds once in a while. May sat down near the little heart-shaped pond, careful not to squish the moss, and dipped her fingers into the cool water. A lotad floated by slowly, giving her a look that somehow said both hello and please don't disturb my vibe. She laughed quietly, almost, whispering, like the whole place had a volume limit. Brock poured her some tea, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and sleep, and they sat without speaking for a while. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the good kind, the kind you only get with people who understand that not everything needs to be filled. A gentle breeze stirred the garden, making the flowers sway like they were dancing, just for them, and a pair of beautifully fluttered past like floating daydreams. "Do the Pokémon just live here?" May asked after a bit, watching an oddish do an extremely slow-motion cartwheel. "Some of them do," Brock replied, sipping his tea. "Some just pass through. They come and go as they like. I guess they know it's a safe place, like a time out from the world." May nodded slowly, like That made more sense than anything she'd heard all week. She looked around again and noticed tiny signs of care. Stones arranged, in gentle spirals, flowers blooming in places too perfect to be accidents. A tiny carved bench that looked like it had been hand-sanded 100 times. Brock had clearly spent years tending this place, not because he had to, but because it gave something back. Not fame, not rewards, just peace. As they sat there, a chikorita waddled over and plopped its leafy head on Brock's leg, as if clocking in for its afternoon nap. He smiled and scratched behind its ear without missing a beat. May watched with a quiet sort of awe. "I never pictured you as a garden guy," she said softly. "You're always cooking or training or chasing nurses." Brock chuckled, not even embarrassed. "Well, you know. I contain multitudes," he said with the kind of tone that meant he absolutely practiced that line in the mirror. But then he added more thoughtfully, "Honestly, it started as a way to feel close to my mom. She loved flowers, used to talk to them like they were part of the family. I didn't get it back then. But now," he looked around, eyes lingering on, a little patch of marigolds glowing like sunset. "Now I think I get it." May didn't say anything right away. She just leaned back, letting the sunlight settle on her shoulders, and listened to the distant chirp of a lazy hoppip spinning in slow circles overhead. "You should show this place to more people," she said eventually. "It's too nice to keep hidden." Brock shook his head with a soft smile. "Nah, some places need to stay quiet to stay special. Besides, the garden decides who finds it, not me." It sounded like something out of a storybook, but sitting there, surrounded by sleepy Pokémon and sunshine that felt like a warm blanket, May kind of believed him. A few minutes later, Max wandered in. Having followed the smell of tea and suspicion, he stopped, took one look at the place, and whispered, "What? Did we die and go to Celebi's house?" Brock laughed and tossed him a berry, which Max missed entirely, and then acted like he meant it to. Even he couldn't keep up his usual know-it-all routine in a place like this. Eventually, everyone ended up there. Ash, Misty, even Team Rocket once, though they pretended they were there to borrow herbs for evil soup. No one asked too many questions. The garden welcomed them all the same. But every time, no matter who visited or what was going on in the world, Brock always made sure to return alone, just once in a while to sit with the silence, to water the plants, talk to the chikorita, and breathe. And the garden, in turn, bloomed. Not for glory, not for trophies, just because that's what gentle things do when you care for them quietly. Just grow. One lazy afternoon, the garden had one of its most unexpected visitors yet. Professor Oak. Yes, that Professor Oak. The legendary researcher, poet laureate of odd Pokémon metaphors, and occasional coffee spill hazard. He showed up with a notebook tucked under one arm, a puzzled look on his face, and a Tauros that was clearly not meant to fit through the narrow garden gate. Brock blinked mid-tea sip and said, "Professor, how did you even find this place?" Oak, as usual, looked more excited than confused. "I followed a blossom that had pollen I'd never catalogued, and I saw a Vileplume doing interpretive dance, and, well, I ended up here." He stepped gently into the garden, eyes wide and twinkling like he'd just walked into a living poem. "This place, it's extraordinary." Brock offered him tea, which Oak accepted with the enthusiasm of a man who'd had 7 cups already, and saw no reason to stop. He walked slowly, pausing to sketch a bloom roselia, and mutter something about emotional chlorophyll. He didn't take samples or scans, just notes, quiet ones, respectful ones. And for the rest of the afternoon, he simply existed there, like everyone else, folded into the calm. Later that evening, after Oak had left a very poetic thank you note tucked under a rock, signed with a sketch of a smiling Tangela, Brock stood in the middle of the garden and looked around. The light was golden, the kind that makes everything look like it's been wrapped in honey. The Pokémon were dozing in cozy piles, Snubble curled beside them, Execute, a gloom balancing a tiny leaf hat on its head for no reason at all. And in that moment, Brock felt something rare. Not excitement, not accomplishment, just peace. A kind of peace that didn't come from winning battles or being the best cook on the team or impressing a crowd. This peace came from building something soft, something quiet, and letting it live without needing to be loud. He didn't tell anyone that night, but he wrote a little journal entry before bed, just a few words. The garden grew today. Not taller, not wider, just deeper. And that was enough. Over the years, the secret garden never got bigger in the traditional sense. There were no expansion projects, no fancy irrigation systems, but it deepened in memories, in layers of care, the way the stepping stones felt smoother each time they were walked on, the way the wildflowers seemed to remember where Brock sat last, the way the chikorita always waited, no matter how long it had been. It became less of a place and more of a feeling. One day when Brock was older, white in his beard, slower in his step, he brought his younger siblings to see it. They tiptoed in with wide eyes and whispered woes that echoed through the vines. One of them, the youngest, leaned against a mossy rock and said, "Feels like a hug in here." Brock didn't say anything. He just smiled and sat down beside them. He knew they'd never forget it. And someday, maybe one of them would bring someone else. Maybe not to the exact garden. Maybe to one they made themselves. With it, whatever patch of green or corner of peace they could carve out of the noisy world. Because that's how gardens work. They spread quietly, like kindness, like warmth, like the way Brock always said, "Dinner's ready," in that voice that meant you were home. So if you ever find yourself wandering near Pewter City and you feel a soft breeze that smells like basil and mystery, follow it. If a Jigglypuff hums a sleepy tune and a Butterfree hovers like it's guiding your way, don't question it. Just walk. Because you might be closer to the garden than you think. And if you do find it, be gentle. Sit a while. Breathe. And say hello to the chikorita for us. It's probably still there, waiting with its leaf a little droopier, but its heart as full as ever. Brock wouldn't want you to. It was one of those Yoto mornings where the rain didn't even bother being dramatic. No thunder, no lightning, no gusts of wind, threatening to rip your umbrella inside out. Just soft, steady drizzle. The kind that taps politely on the windows and makes everything smell like wet earth and old trees. Ash, Misty, and Brock had holed up in a tiny inn near Azalea Town, a sleepy wooden lodge tucked between two mossy hills, run by an old couple who spoke in whispers and made soup that could fix your soul. Outside, the world was a blur of gray and green. Inside, it smelled like steamed rice and worn blankets. Pikachu was curled up on Ash's lap, tail twitching every now and then in its sleep like it was chasing something in a dream. Misty was reading a book she found on the shelf titled Johto's Most Adorable but Mildly Dangerous Pokémon. She kept giggling every time she got to the part about Sunken. Stampedes and Brock, ever the multitasker, was sketching new stew ideas on a napkin using a pen that had definitely been chewed on by a Growlithe at some point. "I don't know why, but rainy days in Johto just feel different," Misty said eventually, not looking up from her book. "Like the clouds are trying to tuck you in." Ash yawned so wide it startled a nearby hoppip that had floated in through the open window. "Rain days mean nap days," he declared, shifting Pikachu a little and pulling a blanket over them both. "Trainer law." Brock raised an eyebrow. "That's not a real law." Ash didn't even open his eyes. "It is if you say it with confidence." Outside, the trees dripped rhythmically, and a few Ladybah flitted through the mist like little floating commas. The inn had no TV, no Pokénav, and definitely no Pokédex updates. Just the sound of rain, the faint creak of old floorboards, and the slow simmer of something wonderful on the stove. For once, there was nothing to do. No tournaments, no rival to chase. No Team Rocket in a suspiciously obvious bush. Just a quiet, sleepy kind of day where time took a nap, too. Brock stood up and stretched, then disappeared into the tiny kitchen. A few clatters and spices later, He returned with a tray of warm soup bowls, each topped with what he proudly called mystery mushroom garnish. Don't ask what kind of mushroom, he warned with a grin. Just trust the process. Ash slurped his happily and immediately turned pink. Why is it spicy? Brock looked delighted. Surprise kick. Wakes up your sinuses. Misty pretended to faint dramatically into her blanket. I was promised comfort food, not combat food. Pikachu, still half asleep, took a tiny spoonful and gave a sleepy little picard that probably meant tolerable. As the day stretched on, so did the lounging. They played a half-hearted card game using old trainer cards they found in the inn's lost-and-found box. Misty claimed a suspiciously bent Totodile card as her lucky draw, while Ash swore his torture card had a fighting spirit. At one point, a Maori wandered in from the rain like it owned the place, shook itself off politely at the door, and joined them by the fire. No one questioned, had it? Honestly, they were grateful for the extra fuzz. I kinda hope the rain never stops, Ash mumbled later, voice thick with sleep. Misty nodded slowly, eyes half-lidded. Same. It's like Giotto pressed pause today, and I'm not in a hurry to unpaw. Brock just smiled, quietly tucking another blanket around them all, and muttered something about how even the busiest adventurers need soft days. Sometimes. Days with no plot, just soup, blankets, and friends. And somewhere in the distance, a politoed croaked a sleepy lullaby. That might have been its version of a bedtime story. The hours rolled on like a slow lullaby, one rain-dappled minute melting into the next. Somewhere between one bowl of soup and 3 rounds of Guess That Pokémon impression, Ash's Geodude voice was truly a crime against ears. The group settled into what could only be described as peak laziness. Brock was half dozing upright in a chair, his sketchbook now serving as a chin rest. Misty had stretched across the rug, her book abandoned in favor of watching water droplets race down the glass. And Ash? Ash had entered that rare trainer state known only as sleeping with your hat still on. It was peaceful, unhurried, like the world itself had, curled up for a nap and forgotten to set an alarm. At one point, the innkeeper's elderly knock towel shuffled over, blinked at the trio, and made a soft, approving hoot before fluffing its feathers and falling asleep on top of the toaster. No one minded. In fact, Misty quietly pointed at it and whispered, "That's my role. Model now." Outside, the landscape had turned a lush, glowing green, the kind that only appears after hours of good soaking rain. Little lotad bobbed past in puddles like lily pad boats with somewhere important to be. Every now and then, a rogue gust of wind would jingle the chimes outside, and inside, it was met with a synchronized sigh from the trio, like their bodies had collectively decided to exhale. Ash eventually woke up just enough to shuffle towards the window. He leaned against it, watching the misty hills disappear into the clouds. "You know," he said sleepily, "I don't think I've ever just existed in a place like this. No gyms, no pressure, no rival popping out of the bushes screaming about destiny." Misty chuckled. "Yeah, I think my blood pressure went down just thinking about that." Brock, barely awake, added, "If I had a garden out there, I'd name every oddish after a spice. Oregano, basil, Todd." "Todd?" Misty blinked. "You'd name a spice Todd?" "Spices are a feeling," Brock mumbled. "Let Todd be a vibe." And for some reason, that set off a full minute of quiet laughter, the kind of tired giggling that only happens when your brain is too sleepy to defend itself and the world feels soft around the edges. They laughed until they wheezed, then fell back into their blanket, thoughts with satisfied sighs. Outside, the light began to dim just a little more, shifting from gray to blue-gray, that unmistakable hour before evening when the sky looks like it's holding its breath. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, a gentle, hesitant tap-tap. Ash sat up slowly, blinking. Misty opened it to reveal a little girl, holding a soggy map, flanked by a shuckle wearing a rain bonnet. "Sorry," she said shyly. "My poke gear ran out of battery and I got turned around on the trail. Is this the inn with the soup?" Brock, instantly alert in chef mode trademark, guided her in like she was royalty. "You found it," he said, offering her a towel and already prepping another bowl. Rainy day soup comes with extra warmth on the side. The girl smiled, her shuckle hopping onto a chair like it had done this before. Soon she was wrapped in a blanket too, eating quietly beside the others as the rain sang on. And something about that made the whole day feel even warmer, like the inn itself had a heartbeat, gently pulling lost things in and saying, "Stay a while." No grand adventure, no last-minute gym battle, just strangers becoming less strange over warm broth and candlelight. Later, Ash watched the rain with her, both their noses pressed lightly to the foggy glass. "You're a trainer, too?" he asked. She nodded. "Just starting out." He grinned. "Then you're in the right place. Rain days are good for planning your next epic win, or your next epic nap." She laughed, the kind of soft laugh that only happens when you realize you're safe and warm after being a little scared. Brock brought over a plate of tiny berry cookies, shaped like various Pokémon. "Pick your Pokémon," he said with a wink. "But be warned, the Snorlax cookie always disappears mysteriously." Misty snorted. "Because you keep eating it before anyone else can." Brock looked positively offended. "That's an allegation and a half." The evening trickled on, full of half-hearted games and lazy storytelling, until the only light left was the golden flicker of lanterns, and to the slow blink of sleepy Pokémon eyes. The inn was hushed now, like it too had pulled a blanket over its head. Rain still whispered outside, but it was softer now, more like a lullaby. And as sleep settled over everyone like mist, the cozy little world of that rainy day in Giotto faded gently into dreams. Tucked away at the very edge of a foggy peninsula, far from the usual map markers and trainer shortcuts, was a place that even most locals didn't believe was real. A tiny hamlet with mossy rooftops, crooked chimneys, and maybe half a dozen gently leaning houses, each one guarded by at least one dozing slowpoke. It didn't really have a name. People who stumbled upon it just started, calling it the Slowpoke Village, and honestly, no one there was in a rush to correct them. Because in this forgotten little patch of the world, where time moved like syrup and the clocks seemed to run only when they felt like it, Slowpoke weren't just Pokémon. They were the entire vibe. Ash and the gang found it completely by accident, of course. After a wrong turn on the way to Kianwood, followed by Ash confidently, leading them in the wrong direction, with a map upside down. They ended up at the edge of a sleepy-looking meadow with mist, curling lazily through the tall grass. Pikachu perked up first, its ears twitching at the unmistakable sound of nothing. Not danger. Not excitement. Just an overwhelming silence, broken only by the occasional sloo echoing faintly through the trees. They followed it like a sleepy breadcrumb trail until they crested a small hill and saw it. A cluster of weathered cabins, surrounded by, count them, at least 20 lounging, snoring, or blankly blinking slowpoke. Misty blinked. "Did we just walk into a village? Or a nap?" Brock adjusted his backpack, squinting into the haze. "If this is a dream, I hope no one pinches me. Ever." The village didn't react much to their arrival. A slowpoke sitting in the middle of the path turned its head about 4 degrees and blinked once, then immediately resumed staring at a daisy like it held the meaning of life. A nearby sign read, "Welcome," complete with a question mark, and was partially buried in moss. Ash stepped forward carefully, half whispering, "I think we're the fastest moving things here." Pikachu, sensing the lack of urgency, hopped onto a porch and plopped down next to a yawning slowpoke, instantly adapting to the local pace like it had been waiting for this kind of day all its life. A little old man shuffled out from one of the cottages, wrapped in a shawl that looked like it had been knitted by a jigglypuff. "Visitors?" he asked slowly, almost in surprise. "Haven't seen any of those since the last full moon that lined up with a Tuesday," which, based on his tone, might have been decades ago. He introduced himself as Elder Moss, the unofficial leader of the village, and offered them tea brewed from slowpoke tail herbs, which Brock politely accepted while Misty asked 12 different times if it was actually made from the tails. "Oh, no," Elder Moss chuckled. "Just inspired by them. The flavor's slow to build and slower to forget." They were invited to stay for a bit since, as Elder Moss explained, It wasn't like anything around here happened quickly, or at all, really. The kids settled in on a weathered bench while the slowpoke lounged all around them, sunbathing even though there was no visible sun. One slowpoke stared into a puddle for so long that Misty eventually sat down next to it, just to see what the big deal was. She left an hour later, convinced the puddle was judging her. Ash, meanwhile, was determined to figure out if the slowpoke had any kind of schedule. "Do they eat at certain times?" he asked. Elder Moss shrugged. "Sometimes." "Do they sleep in a pattern?" "Roughly always." "Do they evolve here?" The elder smiled. "Only if they remember to." Brock, always the culinary scientist, began sketching out a recipe inspired by Slowpoke Village. "We're talking the softest stew ever, like cloud-level tender, something you can only make if you've got nothing else to do for 12 hours. Eventually, the group just slowed down. It was impossible not to. There were no poke centers nearby, no rival trainers, no Pidgey, male, no poke marts. It was like the world had taken a collective deep breath and decided, yeah, let's just stay like this for a while. They spent the afternoon watching slowpoke art in action. One of them had apparently been stacking pebbles into a spiral shape for over a week. Another was writing poetry by dragging his tail through soft mud. It had, so far, spelled out the word mud. And as the mist rolled in again and the village lanterns began to glow like little orbs of starlight, Ash yawned and whispered, "I think I get it now. This place isn't forgotten. It's just not trying to be remembered." As night began to settle over the village like a soft, slowpoke tail blanket, the colors of the landscape seemed to gently melt into twilight. Purples bled into blues. The mist turned a calming silver, and the sky above glowed with stars so clear, it was as if the universe had taken a moment to slow down too, just for this village. Ash stretched out on a small wooden dock by the pond, arms behind his head, staring up in quiet awe. The water below him mirrored the sky so perfectly that it almost looked like he was floating between two galaxies. "I feel like time forgot about this place," he murmured, but in a good way, like it's a secret the world never needed to fix. Nearby, Misty sat with her feet in the water, gently kicking every few minutes, not out of restlessness, but simply because the ripples were so fun to watch. She had befriended a particularly sleepy slowpoke that had accidentally followed her around all afternoon, presumably forgetting it wasn't hers. She had named it Blip. Brock, ever the enthusiastic anthropologist when it came to strange food or sleepy customs, was currently deep in conversation with Elder Moss over a bowl of something that looked suspiciously like oatmeal but smelled like roasted marshmallows and forest leaves. "The secret," Elder Moss said wisely, "is to cook it while reciting a slowpoke lullaby. Slowly. Rushing the song ruins the flavor." Back on the dock, Pikachu and Blip had engaged in the slowest tail high five known to mankind. It took a full minute for the tails to align, and another 30 seconds for the bonk to actually happen. But when it did, Ash and Misty both cheered softly like they'd just witnessed the finals of the Sleep Olympics. The only other sounds were the soft rustling of wind through reeds and the occasional plop of a slowpoke sliding contentedly into the water. Everything here was unhurried. No one walked fast, no one spoke fast, and somehow even thoughts seemed to drift through your head at half speed. Ash leaned over to Misty. "You know, if I stayed here too long, I think I'd forget how to battle." Misty smiled. "Honestly? I think I'd forget how to argue with you. And that feels even weirder." Brock looked up from his second helping of marsh oats. "I think I'd forget why I even stress bait. This place is like a spa made entirely of naps." And yet, for all the lack of structure, the village felt more alive than some of the bustling cities they'd passed through. The slowpoke weren't lazy. They were just committed to a pace of life that didn't care about deadlines, competitions, or trainer rankings. They didn't need excitement. They had each other and infinite puddle staring. Later that evening, as the kids huddled by a gentle campfire lit by glowing stones and surrounded by half-napping slowpoke and one Snorlax that no one recalled inviting, Elder Moss brought out something special, an old, dust-covered wooden box. Inside it were hand-drawn maps, faded photos, and tiny carvings shaped like slowpoke, little tokens left behind by travelers who had stayed here over the years. "We don't have a guest book," he explained, "but we do have memory stones. If you stay long enough to slow down, you leave behind something to say you were here." Ash picked up one of the stones. It had a tiny, very bad drawing of what was probably a Charmander, with the word "Zane was here" scratched into the bottom in bold, jagged letters. Misty smiled. "Looks like Zane never learned patience." Brock found one, carved with a little stew pot. Now this guy understood the assignment. The kids each chose a stone. Ash carefully etched a small Pikachu with a thunderbolt tail. Misty drew a heart-shaped puddle, and Brock carved a sleepy bowl of soup with steam rising in the shape of a slowpoke's tail. "Now you're part of the slowness," Elder Moss said with a smile that practically carried its own yawn. By the time they finally curled up in the guest loft, surrounded by quilts stitched with slowpoke patterns, hand-sewn pillows, shaped like tiny tails, and the comforting scent of sleep tea, the kids felt more rested than they had in weeks. There was no alarm, set, no urgent plans, just a shared feeling that tomorrow could wait. Maybe even the day after that, too. As Ash rolled over and watched Pikachu gently snoring beside him, he whispered, "We'll move fast again soon." Just not yet. And in the corner of the room, Blip slowly blinked at a window, yawned wide enough to show a single sleepy tooth, and fell over like a sack of dreams. There's something about returning to a familiar place after a long adventure that just hits differently. Not in a loud, celebratory way, but in the soft, soul-sighing way that feels like slipping into your favorite old sweater. That's exactly the feeling Ash had the moment. He saw the twinkling lights of Professor Oak's lab from the hilltop. It had been a while since he'd been back. Weeks of travel, countless battles, too many mystery sandwiches, and at least one accidental sleepover in a hollowed-out pseudo-wudo trunk. But now, under a soft pink sky, the idea of spending a whole night back at the lab felt like the rarest treasure of all. "Is it weird that I'm more excited for a pillow and indoor plumbing than catching a new Pokémon?" Ash asked, adjusting his backpack for the 47th time that hour. "Not weird at all," Misty said, rubbing her shoulder where Togepi had been napping for most of the day. "My idea of heaven right now is a fluffy blanket and not being chased by Beedrill." "Speak for yourselves," Brock chimed in with a grin. "Professor Oak promised me we'd try out a midnight snack experiment involving Poke Puffs and marshmallows. I came here to taste science." As they reached the steps of the lab, the front door swung open before they could even knock. And there he was, Professor Oak, himself smiling with that warm mix of curiosity and gentle chaos he always seemed to carry. "Ah, my favorite trio of traveling. Tornadoes," he greeted, arms wide. "And look, you haven't broken anything yet. Remarkable progress." They all laughed as they stepped inside, instantly hit with the nostalgic smell of old books, herbs, and slightly burnt toast, likely from Tracy, who peeked out from the kitchen moments later holding a tray of snacks and looking both delighted and slightly flour-covered. The lab was exactly the same, and that was the magic of it. Stacks of research papers teetering in perfectly chaotic towers. Shelves full of pokeballs, dusty tomes, and at least 3 different versions of the Pokédex sitting side by side like a nerdy family portrait. Laughter from Pokémon in the habitat yard outside, and the familiar sound of Mook trying to hug someone, somewhere. "We set up sleeping bags in the observatory," Oak said cheerfully, pointing upstairs. "Best view of the stars in all of Pallet Town, plus the heater works when it feels like it, so pack your fluffiest pajamas." Pikachu zipped ahead, tail wagging with the excitement of impending snacks and probable cuddles. Ash followed close behind, pausing only to greet a wandering Bulbasaur who seemed to nod solemnly before curling up in a sunny patch by the window. Upstairs, the observatory had indeed been transformed into a sleepover paradise. Blankets were everywhere, scattered like cloud puffs across the wooden floor. There were piles of pillows, dim lanterns shaped like pokeballs, and a table covered in snacks, including Brock's favorite, honey-roasted nano chips. They all kicked off their shoes, flopped dramatically into the fluffiest corners they could find, and let out synchronized sighs that probably echoed all the way to Viridian City. It wasn't long before the room filled with the soft rustle of wrappers, the quiet chewing of sleepy kids, and the gentle hum of Pokémon settling in beside them. Tracy joined a few minutes later, carrying a tray of herbal tea and cookies shaped like tiny growlers. "I baked these myself," he said proudly. "They're supposed to promote calmness and vivid dreams. Or they might just taste like cinnamon." I forgot which batch this was. No one complained. Even Misty, who wasn't big on overly cutesy snacks, couldn't resist biting the head off a sleepy growler, cookie and humming in approval. "Tastes like bedtime." The stars above sparkled through the glass dome, slowly blanketing the sky in constellations that looked suspiciously like Pokémon, if you tilted your head just right. Ash pointed out a Gengar-shaped cluster. Misty insisted one looked like cider. Brock argued it was a Snorlax, but was too full of cookies to get up and prove it. Professor Oak popped in briefly to hand out tiny notebooks. "In case anyone has important sleepy thoughts," he said before disappearing again with the quiet rustle of a lab coat and slippers. And so the night began. Not with battles or danger, but with the comforting hush of friends, familiar walls, and that magical feeling of slowing down just enough to remember what it's like to feel safe and still. There was no rush, no schedules, just the stars, the stories, and a whole night ahead to drift between laughter and dreams. As the evening settled further into that sweet middle space between just a bit tired and I might melt into this blanket, the conversation drifted the way it always did at sleepovers. Random, warm, and filled with quiet giggles. Ash was retelling the time he accidentally used a Magikarp in a serious tournament battle. "I really thought it had learned something new," he said, rubbing the back of his head. "But nope, just more flopping. Very enthusiastic flopping." Brock, lying half-wrapped in a sleeping bag like a burrito, laughed. "It's still better than the time I tried to impress a girl by cooking her. Dinner with spicy puffins. I forgot she was allergic to orange berries. Romantic and mildly life-threatening." Misty chuckled, tossing a pillow lightly at him. "Maybe that's why you're single. Your dates require a medical waiver." Above them, the stars were now fully visible, glittering across the glass dome like someone sprinkled the Milky Way directly over, palette down. The ceiling even had a little laser pointer that highlighted constellations, though no one had touched it yet. Tracy finally sat up, took a sip of tea, and activated it with a tap. A gentle green beam glided across the sky. "That's the Altaria cluster," he said, with his usual quiet enthusiasm. "It's said to bring peaceful dreams to travelers." Ash pointed at another cluster, this one shaped like a lumpy Wobbuffet. "What about that one?" "That's probably not officially named," Tracy admitted. "But I vote we call it the constellation of unexpected comebacks." Professor Oak reappeared then, like the sleepy wizard of science he was, wearing a nightcap shaped like a coffin. He carried a small wooden box and set it down in the center of the room. "Now then," he said with mock seriousness, "it's time for the sacred tradition of the Mystery Poke game." Everyone sat up a little straighter. Even Pikachu's ears perked. Ash squinted suspiciously. "Last time, didn't it end with Mook falling, asleep on my face?" "That was one version," Oak admitted. "Tonight's version is much safer, I promise. Mostly." Inside the box were cards, each one with a silly question or challenge written on it, like, "Tell the funniest dream you've had involving a Pokémon." Or, "If your Pokémon had a job in the human world, what would it be?" Tracy pulled one and read aloud. "Describe what your team would do during a lazy Sunday." Ash laughed. "Pikachu would nap in the sun. Snorlax would nap in the shade. Charizard would pretend not to nap and then nap midair. Honestly, it would just be 6 different types of naps." Misty smiled as she drew her card. "If you could turn into any Pokémon for one day, who would you be and why?" She thought for a moment. "Definitely Vaporeon. I could spend the whole day swimming and never get pruny fingers." Brock went next. His card read, "Invent a new poke snack and explain it in full detail." His eyes lit up like a man with a culinary mission. "Okay, hear me out. Cheesy Pika Bites. They're small, lightning-shaped crackers, cheese-stuffed, lightly toasted, and they give you a little zap of energy. Only side effect. You might buzz for a minute or two." The room burst into giggles. Even Oak chuckled. "I see a niche market forming." The game went on until everyone had had their fill of silliness and warmth. Eventually, one by one, they began to settle down again. Tracy snored first, curled next to a sketch pad and an unfinished drawing of the Warbuffer constellation. Brock was next, clutching a cookie like it was a teddy bear. Misty drifted off mid-sentence, her hand still petting Togepi's head. Pikachu and Bulbasaur were both curled in a single blanket pile, their soft breathing perfectly in sync. Even Professor Oak had fallen asleep in a recliner, his coughing cap slightly askew, murmuring about critical hit ratios in his dreams. Ash stayed up a little longer, lying on his back, watching the stars blink above. It was one of those rare, quiet moments where he wasn't thinking about the next badge, or the next town, or the next challenge. Just the now. The peaceful, cozy now. He smiled, pulled the blanket higher over his chest, and whispered to himself, I could get used to this. And as the lab slowly faded into complete silence, with only the occasional nighttime chirp from the Pokémon habitat outside, the wood observatory became a soft galaxy of dreams. Stories hung in the air like constellations. Laughter lingered like perfume. And all that remained was a shared sense of peace. Sleepovers at Professor Oak's lab weren't about doing something big. They were about feeling small, safe, and surrounded by people who made you feel at home. And in a world that never seemed to stop spinning, this little corner of Kanto had learned the secret of stillness. There's a special kind of magic that only happens in the mountains. It's the kind that whispers through the trees just after sunset, that hums in the quiet crackle of a campfire, and that swirls around your ankles like mist as the stars begin to peek out. And tonight, that magic had a name. The Lantern Festival. Ash, Misty, and Brock had stumbled upon it by pure accident, which, let's be honest, was how most of their best memories started. They had planned a simple detour through a quiet mountain pass. Nothing fancy, just a shortcut on their way to the next town. But as they rounded a bend and stepped into a wide, terraced clearing, they saw something glowing, gently in the distance. Dozens of lanterns floating upwards, slow and steady, like dreams learning how to fly. Are we interrupting a ghost party? Misty whispered, half serious. Nah, Brock said, adjusting his backpack. If we were, we'd be getting haunted by now. Trust me, I've read the signs. Comforting, Ash mumbled. They followed the glow down a winding path, the air getting cooler and sweeter with every step. At the base of the mountain was a village they hadn't seen on any map, small, cozy, and absolutely glowing with warm, golden light. Strings of paper lanterns were tied between trees and houses. Tables overflowed with food, decorations, and sleepy-looking Pokémon wearing flower garland. It was the kind of place that made your heartbeat slow down just a little, like even your brain was being told, hey, it's okay, you can rest now. An elderly woman greeted them near the entrance, her kimono patterned with tiny litwicks and swirls of wind. Ah, travelers, she said kindly. Come to send a wish. Ash blinked. A wish. She smiled and handed him a small, square lantern. Each person writes a wish or memory and sends it into the sky. The mountains carry it to the stars. Brock was already nodding like he'd found a new spiritual purpose. This is beautiful. This is culture. This is a great opportunity for atmospheric lighting. The trio wandered into the heart of the village, joining other trainers and villagers sitting around low wooden tables, each one softly and lit by lantern light. Pokémon napped beside their trainers, Growlithe curled under a bench, Chikorita swaying sleepily next to a tea, Set, even a Snorlax half dozing near the food table like an immovable beanbag. Ash, Misty, and Brock were each given a small brush and ink set. Their paper lanterns were folded neatly beside them. What are you going to write? Misty asked, dipping her brush into the inky water. Ash stared at the empty lantern in front of him. I don't know. I've made a lot of wishes before. Some came true. Some took a while. Brock had already begun scribbling, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Mine is about finally opening that dream cafe/gym/Pokémon daycare. With snacks, obviously. Obviously. Misty smirked, then looked thoughtfully at her own lantern. I think I'm going to write about my sisters. Even though they drive me crazy, they're still family, and I guess part of why I am who I am. Ash smiled at that. He finally dipped his brush, thinking hard. Then he slowly began to write. I wish I never forget how all of this feels. Even the weird parts. Even the hard parts. Especially the people who made me smile when I didn't realize I needed it. He paused. Then added, almost like a quiet secret to the stars. And also maybe a Charizard that listens to commands the first time. They laughed softly, careful not to disturb the sleepy stillness of the evening. As the villagers began gathering near the hill's edge, the trio joined them, carrying their lanterns in careful hands. One by one, the lanterns were lit and released, glowing like tiny suns against the darkening sky. Each one lifted slowly, dancing gently in the mountain wind, rising higher and higher until they joined the soft constellation of other wishes, already floating. Ash's lantern bobbed and turned as it ascended, as if it were waving goodbye. Pikachu sat on his shoulder, ears twitching in the breeze, cheeks glowing faintly from the firelight. You think our wishes actually get up there? Ash asked. Misty shrugged. Does it matter? I think the wishing part's already done what it needs to. Yeah, Brock added. Besides, if I wake up tomorrow and suddenly own a cafe, I'll know someone up there was paying attention. They all chuckled and stood in silence as the lanterns faded into pinpricks of light, slowly swallowed by the stars. As the last lantern flickered into the night sky and disappeared into the quiet of the stars, a calm hush fell over the village. Like even the wind was taking a moment to rest. Somewhere in the distance, a pollited croaked lazily, and a few swablu floated across the moon, their cottony wings blending into the clouds like sleepy fluff balls on an evening stroll. Ash, Misty, and Brock found a spot near a small koi pond nestled between two mossy rocks, the kind of place that looked like it had never been touched by time or shoes. The water reflected the golden glow of the lanterns, still bobbing around on the surface, not yet released, like memories that hadn't quite found their way into the past. A gentle breeze stirred the surface, creating ripples that danced like lullabies across the pond. Pikachu leaned over Ash's shoulder. Eyes wide as a lantern shaped like a little lapras floated past. Misty pointed at one nearby, shaped like a blossom doing a twirl. Okay, that one's definitely going to the top of the sky. That's at least a top-tier wish. Brock, now seated cross-legged and wrapped in what could only be described as a blanket poncho, sighed contentedly. If peaceful had a smell, it'd be this village. Lantern wax, mountain air, and whatever that spicy noodle dish was at the second table near the rock with the squirtle carving. Misty chuckled. I'm still dreaming about that dumpling. I'm not even sure if it was filled with berries or magic. Probably both, Ash added. Magic berries. The old woman from earlier returned, moving quietly through the soft grass, her sandals barely making a sound. She sat beside them and handed each of them a cup of warm, fragrant tea. Chamomile and pecha blossom, she said, her voice as gentle as the tea was, sweet. It calms the mind and invites good dreams. They each sipped in silence for a moment, and it was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Just shared presence, quiet hearts, and the glow of 1,000 tiny wishes floating above them. You know, the old woman said, gazing at the sky, these lanterns carry more than wishes. They carry memories. Some people write things they want. Others write things they want to remember. And sometimes the lantern just carries the feeling of a moment, like the laughter of friends or the silence after a long day. Ash looked at the fading trail of light above. And I hope mine carries this. The woman smiled and nodded. It already has. There was something about the way she said it, like the moment had been sealed into the stars already, as if the festival itself had a memory of them now. One more story added to the mountain's collection. As the night deepened, and more villagers began packing up, slowly and quietly, like they were folding the day into a soft blanket, Our trio made their way to the edge of the village, where a small wooden inn stood with paper windows and chiming wind bells. Their room was simple: tatami mats, warm futons, and a window that opened to a view of the valley below. Ash lay on his side, Pikachu curled near his stomach, breathing soft and steady. Misty and Brock were already settled too, their outlines barely visible in the moonlight. I kind of wish every journey had a stop like this, Ash whispered. Misty murmured sleepily. If they did, we'd never leave. True, Brock added, his voice muffled by blanket. We'd be the most well-rested trainers in the league. They chuckled softly, that half-awake kind of laugh that feels warmer than any campfire. Then the room settled into silence once again, comforting, full, and completely unbothered by the need to be anything more. Outside, the last lantern floated gently upward, dancing in the mountain air, its tiny flame pulsing like a heartbeat against the sky. Maybe it carried a wish. Maybe it carried a memory. Or maybe it carried nothing at all. Just a quiet moment between friends, wrapped in starlight, destined to become someone's dream. Now, there are certain things you just don't mess with. A Snorlax's nap schedule, Pikachu's ketchup bottle, and Misty's fishing rod. Seriously. Of all the possessions she's carried through her journey, that rod wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of her soul, a prized relic, a sacred artifact. Basically, if the Cerulean Gym ever had a museum, that fishing rod would have been under bulletproof glass, surrounded by velvet ropes and maybe even a chorus of singing Psyducks. So you can imagine how the night she lost it became a bit of an unforgettable adventure. It all started at a quiet lakeside clearing on the edge of a sleepy forest in Sinnoh. Ash, Misty, and Brock had decided to stop there for the night after a long day of hiking that featured, among other things, a pseudo-wudo dance-off, a Pidgey-led detour into some very unfriendly brambles, and a brief accidental encounter with a very territorial Beedrill hive. So yeah, by the time they reached the lake, everyone was ready to collapse. Well, almost everyone. Misty, of course, saw a body of water and went full gym leader mode. Perfect, she'd said, eyes sparkling. A peaceful little night of fishing. No interruptions, no drama, just me, my rod, and a few friendly Phoebas. Ash groaned from the sleeping bag he hadn't even fully unrolled. Misty, it's dark. We're exhausted. And you've already caught, 17 Magikarp today. They were majestic, Misty shot back. Also, one of them winked at me. Pretty sure it just blinked, Brock muttered from under his blanket. Unbothered, Misty marched to the lake's edge, her beloved rod in hand, and cast her line with the precision of someone who could, probably, do it blindfolded. The lure bobbed gently on the surface as the moonlight shimmered on the water like scattered coins. And for a little while, it was perfect. The sounds of crickets chirping, the occasional splash from a distant tentacool, the soothing rustle of wind through the trees. Misty sighed contentedly. See, she whispered to no one in particular. This is what serenity feels like. Then something tugged, just a little at first, like a playful nibble, then a sharper pull, then an all-out yank, like something below had suddenly realized it was running late, and decided to take the bait, and the rod with it. Whoa, hey, Misty shouted, gripping the rod with both hands as it started jerking wildly. Guys, I think I've got something. Big. Really big. Like Wailord on a bad day, big. Ash sat up groggily, squinting through the dark. Is that a Gyarados? Or are you wrestling the lake itself? Brock peeked out from his blanket cocoon. It's past bedtime o'clock, Misty. I'm serious, she yelled. This thing is strong. The rod bent so far it looked like it might snap in two. Misty dug her heels into the muddy shore, teeth clenched, arms locked in the world's most intense fishing showdown. Pikachu, sensing the drama, climbed up on a nearby rock with an expression that basically said, "You brought this on yourself." Then, without warning, the rod jerked downward one final time and slipped from Misty's hands. There was a splash, a flash of silver under the water, and just like that, It was gone. Silence. Misty stared at the empty space where her fishing rod had once been, blinking slowly. Did that actually just happen? Ash winced. I think it... Yeah, it did. Brock let out a long, dramatic sigh. We are never going to sleep tonight, are we? Misty stood frozen for a second. Then slowly, methodically, she removed her shoes, handed them to Ash, and marched directly into the water. Misty, what are you doing? Ash asked, alarmed. I'm going in, she said. That rod is my legacy. My great-grandmother gave it to my grandmother, who gave it to my mother, who... Okay, fine, I bought it at a Johto flea market, but that's beside the point. It's mine. Ash blinked. Wait, seriously? Pikachu let out a low, sympathetic pika, which probably translated to, let her grieve. Misty was already waist-deep in the lake, squinting into the moonlit water like she was about to conduct a full-blown underwater investigation. The kind of determination on her face could have made even a Garchomp second-guess its choices. Meanwhile, Ash stood on the shore holding her shoes awkwardly like he was in the world's least glamorous Cinderella reenactment. Misty, Brock called, I don't think you're legally allowed to challenge a lake to a rematch. I'm not leaving without my rod, Misty shouted over her shoulder, now knee-paddling through lily pads and muttering things like, it can't have gone far. The current here's barely a drizzle. From a nearby bush, a wild lotad poked its head out, watched Misty's waterlogged mission for a moment, then slowly backed into the leaves like, nope, not my circuit. Ash stepped closer to the shoreline. Look, I get it. That rod meant a lot to you. But maybe it's time to accept. Shh, Misty hissed. Did you hear that? Hear what? I think I just stepped on a shelter. No, wait. It's just a soggy pine cone. Brock shook his head. This is how ghost stories start, you know. And they always begin with someone wading into a lake at night and never coming back, usually to the soundtrack of a hoot-hoot, going hoo-hoo, I told you so. But Misty wasn't giving up. She dove under the surface with a splash, vanished for a few long seconds, and then popped back up, sputtering. Still no rod, she gasped, pushing wet hair from her face. But I think I found a rock shaped like Pikachu. Kind of. Ash looked at Pikachu, who blinked back blankly like, I didn't approve that likeness. After several more minutes of splashing, muttering, and arguing with a rather bold Goldeen who seemed to be playing tag, Misty finally sighed and waded back to shore. She flopped onto the grass beside the fire pit, soaked, shivering, and utterly defeated. Her face wore the solemn expression of someone who'd just lost a trusted battle partner. Or in her case, a moderately expensive but emotionally priceless fishing rod. Ash offered her a blanket, which she accepted wordlessly. Pikachu waddled over and curled up against her side, a tiny gesture of comfort that made her sniffle just a bit, but you know, in a heroic, dignified way. I really loved that rod, she mumbled, her voice half wrapped in sleep and disappointment. It pulled in my first seeking, helped me rescue that baby Poliwag in Hoenn, and it made me feel like me, you know. Brock stirred the campfire back to life, casting a soft golden glow across the little lakeside camp. Maybe it'll wash ashore someday, or maybe some lucky Magikarp will become the most stylish fish in the region. They all chuckled quietly. Ash nudged her. Hey, maybe tomorrow we'll find a new rod, something even better, one that comes with cool stories of its own. Misty looked up at him. You think? Definitely. And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning of the legend. The rod that got away. Pikachu struck a dramatic pose and mimicked a movie trailer sound effect with a Pikachum, which got a sleepy laugh from Misty. Thanks, guys, she murmured, curling under the blanket. Still sad, but less sad. They all settled in again, this time with a little more warmth in the air. The lake glistened under the stars, peaceful once more, as if holding the rod in its watery arms like a borrowed memory. Somewhere, the gentle splash of a Pokémon echoed, followed by a distant, yawning croagunk that sounded like even it was ready for bed. And Misty, drifting closer to sleep, whispered one last thought into the night. If some Psyduck finds it and starts a fishing club, I want naming rights. Ash laughed quietly. Deal. Then the sounds of the forest wrapped around them like a lullaby, and the lake, now guardian of Misty's memory, glowed quietly under the moon. There's one place in the Pokémon world that seems like it was handcrafted for lazy afternoons and naps in the shade. It's Alola. Honestly, it feels like the whole region is on vacation. Even the Pokémon walk slower there, like they're in no rush to be anywhere. And this one particular afternoon, well, it was the kind of afternoon where time decided to hit the snooze button. And nobody complained. Ash, still fairly new to Alola's rhythm at the time, had slowly but surely been learning the art of slowing down. No intense gym, battles, no angry team rocket balloon chases, just a hammock, a light breeze, and a sleepy Rowlet who spent 98% of the day dozing and the other 2% falling out of trees with surprising grace. The day began with absolutely no urgency. Ash didn't spring out of bed with wild-eyed ambition like usual. Instead, he opened one. I noticed Pikachu still snoring lightly at the foot of his bed, and simply let out a sigh that sounded a lot like nope before rolling back under the covers. Meanwhile, outside on the Pokémon school's sunny hilltop, the breeze was doing what it does best, drifting slowly through the palm trees, rustling their leaves like nature was humming a lullaby. Rowlet was already perched on a branch, completely horizontal, wings out like a feathered starfish, absolutely unbothered by gravity or responsibilities. Lily strolled by with a basket of malasadas and a straw hat that was about 3 sizes too big. "It's so warm today," she said dreamily. "I might melt into a puddle." "Same," Mallow yawned, emerging from behind a bush with a cup of something cold and vaguely pineapple-scented. "It's a day for hammocks, not homework." Ash finally appeared on the porch in socks, hair even messier than usual, blinking like he was trying to remember what decade it was. Pikachu was on his shoulder, already halfway back to sleep. "I dreamed I caught a Tapu Koko made of shaved ice," he mumbled. "And every time I threw a poke ball, it gave me a brain freeze." "That's oddly poetic," Sophocles commented from a nearby beanbag chair. "You okay, ma?" "Never better," Ash said, flopping down on the nearest patch of grass like it owed him money. "This is the best day ever." And it really was. The whole group slowly gathered on the sun-dappled hillside, each person collapsing into their own kind of lounge position. Some on picnic blankets, others against warm rocks, and Lana, impressively, balancing a book on her nose while resting between 2, sleeping Poplio. No one was in a rush. There was no schedule, just occasional snack breaks and the background soundtrack of Buzzing Cutifully and Sleepy Wingle. Professor Kukui showed up briefly, sunglasses on and holding a coconut drink. "Hey kids, don't forget, hydration is important." Then he promptly wandered off again, trailed by his Rockruff, who had clearly entered lazy puppy mode and was gently pawing at butterflies in slow motion. At some point, someone brought out a ukulele. No one knows who started it, and a soft, aimless melody began to drift through the air. Even Rotom Dex didn't have the heart to lecture anyone about productivity. It just floated above the group like a sleepy cloud, occasionally muttering facts like, "Did you know Alolan Sandshrew prefer colder climates?" before trailing off into a soft zzz. Ash lay there, one hand behind his head, eyes half-lidded, watching a slow drift of clouds roll by. "You ever think," he began lazily, "that maybe the clouds are just giant Mareep that forgot how to bar?" Mallow blinked. "What?" "Just saying," Ash mumbled. "They look soft." "I think you're sun-drunk," Lily giggled. "I think I'm having the best nap of my life," Ash replied. Even Pikachu let out a tiny yawn that sounded like a sigh of absolute satisfaction. It was the kind of afternoon where conversations turned into mumbles, mumbles turned into snores, and snores turned into dreams, filled with warm sand, cool breezes, and an endless supply of malasadas. And none of it was planned. It just happened. Because in Alola, some days aren't meant to be filled with battles or big revelations. Some days are just about resting, about letting the sunlight dance on your skin, feeling the earth beneath your back, and remembering that even Pokémon trainers need a good nap now and then. The hours trickled by. Not that anyone noticed. Time in Alola had a habit of meandering like a slowpoke on a sightseeing tour. The sun shifted slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows through the palms, and the breeze, still polite and unhurried, whispered secrets to the grass like it was catching up on all the gossip from the sea. Ash, still lying on the hillside with Pikachu snoozing soundly on his chest, cracked one eye open. "You think time moves slower here?" he asked no one in particular. Sophocles, barely conscious, waved a hand in the air from his spot under a beach umbrella. Time gave up trying to be useful in Alola. Across from them, Rowlet had somehow fallen asleep inside a half-eaten coconut, belly up and snoring quietly. No one was quite sure how it got in there, but no one dared disturb the masterpiece. It was like a work of art, titled Still Life with Coconut and Bird. Mallow rolled onto her stomach and started drawing lazy doodles in the dirt with a stick. "This is my new favorite kind of training," she said with a grin. "Zero effort, maximum good vibes." Lana opened one eye from beneath her straw hat. "We should call it nap-based strategy. Rest until your opponent gets bored and walks away." Brock would have been proud. Ash stretched slowly as if his limbs weighed just a little more under the tropical sun. He watched a cluster of execute wobble by, in a loose line, each of them bumping into each other like sleepy bumper cars. One of them rolled slightly off course and bonked, gently into his shoe, then let out a tiny egg, like it had just been mildly inconvenienced. Ash scooted it back toward its friends, and it rejoined the group without complaint, like, "Cool, cool, no worries." There was something magical about the way afternoon unfolded without direction. No tasks, no destinations. Just existing, being. And for someone like Ash, who had spent years running, chasing badgers, and waking up in the middle of the night to train under waterfalls, it was surprisingly nice to do absolutely nothing. Pikachu rolled onto his side, still asleep, one tiny paw twitching in a dream. Maybe he was imagining surfing on a big wave, or perhaps chasing a Malasada the size of a Snorlax. Either way, he looked completely content. Then, from the far corner of the field, a soft hum began to rise. It was subtle at first, like a lullaby carried on the wind. Everyone's heads turned slowly, very slowly, because no one wanted to move too fast to see what it was. Kiawe. Yes, Kiawe. The guy known for waking up at sunrise to train with fire and volcanoes and dramatic hair flips. He was singing, and not his usual passionate, flame-filled chants. No, this was different. He was gently strumming a ukulele, wearing sunglasses shaped like Charizard wings, and humming a tune so soothing that even a Grimer would have wept. "I didn't know he could sing," Lily whispered, sitting up slightly. "I don't think he did either," Mallow whispered back. Kiawe opened one eye and spotted everyone watching. "Don't make a big deal out of it," he muttered. "It's for relaxation, fire type, chill. Fire type chill," Ash repeated. "That's a move I never thought I'd see." As the melody continued, the group slowly began to sway in place, barely even realizing it. Some of the Pokémon joined in, Poplio, making bubbly rhythm noises, Togedemaru rolling in lazy circles like a living maraca. Even the usually rowdy Tortonata was lying on, its back letting a fomentus balance leaves on its nose like some kind of tropical spa treatment. Ash reached over and grabbed a nearby Malasada. Someone had brought a big bag of them and left it sitting in the grass like a gift, from the gods. He took a bite and let out the kind of satisfied sigh that can only be produced by perfectly fried dough and sunshine. "This is the life," he murmured with a crumb on his lip. Pikachu gave a soft chew, in agreement without even opening his eyes. And honestly, what more did they need? No rush, no goal, just good friends, good naps, and the feeling that for this one lazy afternoon, everything in the world was exactly where it needed to be. Now let's rewind to a night that was equal parts magical and mildly chaotic, because that's just what happens when you cross paths with a Jigglypuff who dreams of stardom. Not just any Jigglypuff, mind you. The Jigglypuff, marker in hand, microphone at the ready, and absolutely no concept of volume control. You remember her, right? The pink puffball whose lullaby could bring a Gyarados to tears, and then to sleep. It all started one quiet evening in a small town that wasn't even on most maps. One of those blink-and-you-miss-it places where the streetlights hum softly and the Pokémon Center doubles as a karaoke bar on weekends. Ash and the gang had stopped in for the night, weary from a long day of travel. They weren't expecting anything exciting, just a meal, a bed, and maybe a hot chocolate or two. But fate, as usual, had other plans. As they walked into the local community square, they noticed a small stage set up under the stars. Strings of lights twinkled overhead like festive little Voltor, and a sleepy crowd had gathered on picnic blankets and beanbags, all facing the stage with soft smiles and mugs of steaming pin-up cider. A hand-painted sign read, "Midnight Melody, Open Mic Night." "Oh, this looks cozy," Misty said, clutching a cup of cocoa as cider trailed behind her, already looking confused. "I hope someone sings the poker up," Ash joked, nudging Brock. "Classic." Brock naturally had his guitar slung over his shoulder before anyone asked. "I could do a little number." He grinned, eyes already, scanning the audience for Nurse Joy. "Maybe something romantic." "Please, no," Misty muttered. As the group found a spot near the back, the announcer stepped up and tapped the mic. "Next up," she said with a sleepy smile, "we have a very special guest. She's small, she's round, she's got pipes that put Exploud to shame. Please welcome Jigglypuff." Ash sat up straighter. "No way, that Jigglypuff." Pikachu's ears twitched in recognition and immediate concern. And there she was, strolling up onto the stage with the confidence of a star who'd played sold-out stadiums. She had her trusty mic, her determined little feet, and her signature look of, "I'm going to sing and you're going to love it whether you want to or not." She cleared her throat. The crowd hushed. Jiggly-puff, jiggly-puff. Instantly, you could feel the atmosphere shift. Her voice, as always, was hauntingly beautiful, soft and airy, like it had been made from clouds and sugar, the kind of lullaby that wrapped around your brain and whispered, "Shh, everything's fine now." Ash's eyes drooped almost immediately. Misty's cup of cocoa tilted dangerously in her hand. Brock slumped backward into the grass with a blissful grin on his face. Even Pikachu, valiantly trying to stay awake, swayed side to side like a sleepy metronome before flopping over in Ash's lap with a gentle snore. Within moments, the entire crowd was out cold. And Jigglypuff, oh Jigglypuff. She finished her song with a dramatic flourish, looked out at her unconscious audience, and her eyes narrowed. Not again. Out came the marker. With a huff of dramatic frustration that only a tiny diva could pull off, Jigglypuff whipped out her trusty marker like a cowboy drawing at high noon. She strutted down from the stage with the intensity of someone personally offended by everyone's REM cycles. One by one, she inspected the snoozing audience like an artist surveying blank canvases. First up, Brock. Poor guy never stood a chance. With his eyes shut and a goofy grin on his face, he was practically begging for a doodle. Jigglypuff nodded, scribbled a moustache worthy of a Kalos opera singer across his upper lip, then added tiny musical notes on his forehead for flair. Misty was next, curled up with Togepi, who had already rolled halfway into her hoodie like a little egg burrito. Jigglypuff hesitated for a moment. Baby Pokémon were usually off limits. But then, with an artist's flourish, she gave Misty an elegantly swirled monocle and goatee. Respectful but whimsical, Ash, of course, got the full treatment. A spiral on each cheek, exaggerated eyebrows, and what looked suspiciously like a squirtle shell on his nose. Pikachu, still snoozing in his lap, was spared the artwork, but did get a quick pat on the head. Even Jigglypuff had a soft spot. Once satisfied, she capped her marker, climbed back on stage, and gave a little curtsy to her unconscious audience. Then she stomped off with the air of someone who had done her best and been tragically misunderstood. Again. Fame, after all, is a lonely road. The next morning was one of confusion, laughter, and a few accidental mirror glances that led to startled yelps. Ash woke up mid-snort, blinking against the early sunlight. Pikachu stretched adorably beside him, gave him one look, and tilted his head as if to say, "You might want to check your face." Misty was the first to discover the doodles. "Why do I have facial hair?" she shrieked, scrambling for her bag. "Is this permanent? Marker?" "I think I look distinguished," Brock said proudly, still half asleep. "Very mature." Ash wiped his cheek with his sleeve and paused. "Was it Jigglypuff again?" "Looks like it," Misty muttered, examining her reflection in a spoon. "I thought she moved to Hoenn for a music career." "Maybe this is her comeback tour," Brock said, pulling out a pocket mirror with alarming speed. The townspeople were starting to stir too, many of them wandering out of the square with dreamy smiles and musical notes scribbled on their faces. No one was mad. If anything, they looked oddly refreshed, like they'd been lulled into the deepest, coziest sleep of their lives. One of them yawned and said, "Best concert I ever forgot attending." Ash chuckled, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You know, for a Pokémon who gets mad when people fall asleep, she sure is good at putting people to sleep. She's like a lullaby and a grudge," Misty muttered, scrubbing at her doodles with a wet napkin. As they packed up their things, Jigglypuff's microphone lay abandoned on the stage. Just for a moment, a small, round silhouette could be seen in the distance, pausing at the edge of town to look back. Ash raised a hand in a lazy way. "Thanks for the concert, Jigglypuff." She didn't wave back, but maybe, just maybe, her ears twitched a little in acknowledgement. And then, with a bounce and a swirl, she was gone, off to find her next audience, her next stage, and no doubt her next batch of unfortunate nap victims. Later that day, as the group traveled along a quiet woodland path, Ash pulled out a mirror and chuckled. "You know, she actually gave me eyelashes this time. Like really long ones. You look fabulous," Brock deadpanned. "Maybe Jigglypuff's trying to tell me I should consider a new look," Ash joked. Pikachu chattered in agreement. Misty rolled her eyes. "Or maybe she's just trying to tell you to stay awake next time." "Not a chance," Ash said, lying back on the grass for a quick nap. "That song hits harder than a Snorlax's belly flop." The woods were quiet. The sky was clear. And in the distance, the faintest notes of a lullaby drifted on the wind, barely audible, like a musical wink from a pink puffball determined to sing, doodle, and dream her way into legend. Pikachu chattered in agreement. Misty rolled her eyes. "Or maybe she's just trying to tell you to stay awake next time." "Not a chance," Ash said, lying back on the grass for a quick nap. "That song hits harder than a Snorlax's belly flop." The woods were quiet. The sky was clear. And in the distance, the faintest notes of a lullaby drifted on the wind, barely audible, like a musical wink from a pink puffball determined to sing, doodle, and dream her way into legend. Now, if you've ever had a midnight craving, and I mean one of those sneaky little ones that hits you right when you're almost asleep, you're in good company. Because tonight, our furry yellow friend Pikachu is feeling just the same. It's deep in the night, and everyone's fast asleep at the campsite. The only sounds are the gentle chirping of nocturnal Pokémon and the faint crackle of a dying campfire. But Pikachu has other plans. With a twinkle in his eye and his tummy doing tiny backflips, he wiggles out from Ash's sleeping bag with the grace of a trained ninja. Or, well, as close as a hungry electric mouse can get. He glances left, glances right. No sign of movement. Torchica's snoring, little puffs of warm air rising from its beak. Meowth, oddly enough, is nestled in a sleeping bag, too, mumbling something about rare candies in his dreams. Pikachu tiptoes. Yes, actual tippy toes. Over twigs and stones, his cheeks dimly glowing with excitement, not lightning. You can almost hear his little brain calculating the most efficient snack route. Now, Ash did say no more berries before bed. He was quite clear. And Brock, ever the caretaker, tucked away a basket full of autumn berries, citrus berries, and one particularly tempting pecha berry. Pikachu remembers this well because he made direct, emotional eye contact with that pecha berry earlier in the day. It was love at first sight. And now, it's time for a quiet little reunion. The moonlight bathes the campsite in silvery blue hues as Pikachu slinks closer to the stash. Every shadow seems to stretch and sway like it knows a secret. Somewhere in the background, a noctowl hoots once, possibly as a warning or maybe just cheering him on. And then, success. Pikachu reaches the basket. He peeks inside. Jackpot. The berries are all there, plump and shimmering, in the moonlight, like tiny edible jewels. He plucks the pecha berry gently, carefully balancing it on his paws like he's holding a crown. For a moment, he pauses and smiles. Victory has never tasted so sweet. Well, not yet, but it's about to. Just as he's about to take the first nibble, a little rustle breaks the silence. Torchic shifts in its sleep, one eye half opening. Uh-oh. Pikachu freezes. You could almost hear a record scratch if this were a movie. For a moment, it's a standoff. Torchic blinks. Pikachu blinks. Torchic goes right back to sleep. Phew, crisis averted. Honestly, give Pikachu an award for this covert operation. With his Pecha prize secured, Pikachu scampers just a little farther from the group, behind a log under the open stars, and finally takes the tiniest, happiest bite. His tail wiggles ever so slightly in glee. He sits back, munching slowly, savoring every juicy moment. It's a moment of pure peace. Just a little creature enjoying a snack under the stars, doing exactly what his heart told him to do. You'd think that'd be the end of the mission, right? But oh no, Pikachu spots something out of the corner of his eye. Another berry one of those tangy ones Brock always says are too spicy for bedtime. And now Pikachu's curious. Should he? No, he shouldn't. But also, yes, obviously yes. Pikachu eyes the spicy berry like it's a forbidden treasure in an ancient temple. He tiptoes towards it, again, with a seriousness that would make any secret agent proud. You'd think he was infiltrating a Team Rocket base, not just sneaking an extra bite. He gently nudges it out of the basket with a paw, watching it roll in slow motion like it's in a dramatic movie trailer. It stops just beside a leaf, perfectly balanced, practically daring him to try it. With a cheeky little grin, Pikachu takes a tiny nibble. A pause. Then his cheeks puff out and his ears shoot upward in pure surprise. Yep, it's spicy all right. There's a little zap of heat, and not the electric kind. His face scrunches, then relaxes. Actually, it's not bad. Kinda warm, kinda exciting. He lets out a soft Pika that sounds like someone trying to quietly say wow through a mouthful of salsa. He keeps nibbling, a little at a time, until even that berry is gone too. But now comes the real challenge, getting back without waking anyone up. His belly now pleasantly full, Pikachu begins the return trek, the proud swagger of a mission accomplished slowing just slightly from that full belly wobble. He weaves through the same shadows, carefully avoiding the crunchy leaves he'd marked in his mind on the way there. Seriously, this mouse has stealth strategy, but just as he's approaching Ash's sleeping bag again, Meowth rolls over and lets out a little snore. Pikachu freezes. Not again. This time, it's a closer call. Meowth's eyes flutter open for a second, and there's that moment. Eye contact. Full. Direct. The kind that makes your soul say, oh. But to Pikachu's luck, Meowth just mumbles. No more contests. Jessie already took my glitter. Sizz. And rolls over. Pikachu slowly exhales the tiniest sigh of relief. That was close. He finally makes it back to Ash's side, nestling quietly back into the little crook of the sleeping bag he'd left behind. Ash is still fast, asleep, one hand lazily draped over Pikachu's back, as if he somehow knew his little buddy would find his way back, no matter what. Pikachu snuggles in, curling into a warm yellow fluff ball, content and full and smiling softly into the night. The moon shifts slightly above the treetops, casting soft glows on the peaceful campsite. Everyone's still snoozing, unaware of the great snack caper that just took place. Torchic snores. Meowth murmurs about glitter. And Pikachu. He's already drifting back off, dreaming of pecha berries floating in the sky like balloons. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow morning when the gang wakes up, Brock will notice a berry or two missing. He'll squint at the basket, look at Pikachu, who's feigning in the most innocent sleep pose imaginable. Paws tucked, cheeks relaxed. Maybe even a little bit of berry juice still on his chin. But Brock will say nothing, because deep down, even he knows. Sometimes you just need a midnight snack mission. So tonight, rest easy, knowing that even the most responsible Pokémon have a little mischief in them. It's all part of the charm, right? And as the crickets sing and the stars twinkle on, our little yellow friend curls tighter under the stars, belly full, tail twitching gently, and a smile still tugging at the corners of his sleepy face. The campfire's embers had long faded into soft, glowing coals, casting a faint amber light that flickered gently across the sleeping faces of Ash and the others. A light breeze rustled the nearby trees, and the quiet of the forest settled back in, wrapping the entire campsite like a warm blanket. Everything felt still again, except, of course, for the tiniest shuffle of leaves, because even in dreams, Pikachu wasn't quite done. Still nestled against Ash, he stirred slightly, his nose twitching. Perhaps a dream about a floating orchard of berries was getting too vivid. Or maybe he had one last crumb stuck in his fur. Either way, he rolled over onto his back, stubby legs pointing toward the stars, giving one of those tiny, unconscious sleep sighs, the kind that lets everyone nearby know this little adventurer was now deep in the land of dreams. Oddly enough, the rest of the Pokémon at the campsite seemed to be following suit. Torchic had somehow managed to turn, completely upside down, its legs waving lightly in the air with each snore. Meowth had found a log to curl around like a cat burrito. Even Brock's Ludicolo was now resting beside a tree, Sombrero gently sliding over one eye like a dozing lounge singer. The whole group had unknowingly drifted into a synchronized slumber, each wrapped in their own cozy little world. It was a kind of peace only found in these quiet moments, far from cities, battles, or Pokédex alerts. Just friends under the stars, wrapped in the rhythm of nature. Pikachu's ear twitched again, responding to a tiny sound in the distance. The hoot of a noctowl, maybe, or the flap of wings from a passing beautifully. But nothing alarming, just the forest whispering its own bedtime story. He barely stirred, just a subtle wiggle, and a lazy blink, confirming all was still safe. Ash, without waking, gave a sleepy murmur, something like, "Not the ketchup again," which earned a muffled little Pika from Pikachu, who might have remembered exactly what that dream was about. But in that peaceful tangle of dreams and soft forest noises, something else happened. A single berry, one of the spicy ones Pikachu had snuck earlier, tumbled from a higher ledge of the stash and rolled quietly down toward Meowth's paw. It tapped him, ever so lightly, and he stirred. His eyes blinked half open. He sniffed, looked around, then narrowed his gaze suspiciously. He stared at the berry, then at Pikachu, back at the berry, then again at Pikachu. There was silence. And then Meowth turned over and muttered, "I'll deal with it tomorrow," and went back to sleep, paw curling around the berry like it was a fuzzy plush toy. Crisis averted again. And so the night carried on with only the whispers of wind and the gentle hush of the forest. Time slowed, almost pausing entirely, as the stars continued to wheel silently overhead. This night would be one of those special ones, never written in a Pokédex, never mentioned in a journal, but tucked away in the quiet corners of memory. A night not of action, but of calm, not of big battles, but of small, sweet victories, like sneaking a snack and still making it back in time for morning cuddles. As the first hints of morning color began to nudge the horizon, soft purples and the gentlest gold, Pikachu yawned in his sleep, stretched, and rolled once more into Ash's side. And with a full belly, a successful mission behind him, and a heart full of contentment, he dozed on, unaware that this little night would one day be remembered as one of the coziest adventures of them all. Because sometimes, even in a world of epic journeys and legendary Pokémon, the tiniest tales are the ones that stick. By the time the moon began its gentle descent behind the canopy, the entire forest seemed to collectively exhale. The world had tucked itself in. Dew formed quietly on leaves. Spiders mended sleepy webs in the corners of branches, and a cricket tune hummed a final lullaby before retiring for the night. These were the gentle things, tiny rhythms that only made themselves known when you weren't trying to listen, when your heart had finally settled, and your breathing matched the calm of the trees. Back at camp, the berry stash remained mostly untouched, save for one small, uneven pile that was now suspiciously one oran short. Not that anyone was counting. Meowth, still curled around his surprise berry, snored softly and muttered something, unintelligible, that sounded suspiciously like, no, not the tuna again. His tail twitched in rhythm with a dream that probably involved food and a lot of unnecessary sass. A few feet away, Torchic gave a little kick in its sleep, sending a pebble tumbling toward the campfire's edge. It clinked once, then came to rest against a still warm stone. No one stirred. It was the kind of night where even mistakes sounded like lullabies. And Pikachu? Well, he had finally gone completely limp, belly full and cheeks relaxed. His little paw was resting against Ash's arm, gently rising and falling with each breath Ash took. Occasionally, one of his ears would twitch, maybe catching the scent of another distant berry, or dreaming of one of those bounce pad trees from Alola that shot fruit through the air like party cannons. Hard to say. Ash, in the deep sleep of someone who'd trained all day and worried all evening about keeping everyone safe, had that slack-jawed expression that only arrived when your body gave up trying to stay awake and just let go. He murmured something about gym badges and Pikachu, don't eat that, under his breath, but didn't stir. And even if he had, it probably would have just been to roll over and pull Pikachu a little closer. A gentle wind passed through the clearing, just enough to rustle a few strands of Ash's hair and send the scent of the forest wafting across the camp. It smelled of moss and pine needles and that particular kind of earthy peace that only exists between midnight and dawn. The stars blinked overhead, impossibly far, but somehow still watching, still present. And maybe, just maybe, a few of them smile. Because this was a moment not many would remember. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was small. It didn't involve saving a city or defeating a legendary. It was a soft footstep on a mossy path. A shared berry in the dark. A successful snack mission, pulled off with the precision of a sleepy ninja. A moment of friendship that unfolded quietly, with no need for applause. Eventually, the black sky began to turn gray-blue at the edges, hinting at the morning to come. A talo chirped once, groggily, as if confused why it was even awake yet. The forest stretched. So did the campers. One by one, bodies began to stir. Ash was the last to wake, blinking at the golden light and wondering vaguely why he had berry stains on his blanket. Pikachu simply yawned and smiled, already pretending like nothing had happened, like he hadn't pulled off the most daring snack rescue mission. Since that time, they ran into a hoarding Snorlax. And just like that, the morning began. Another day, another journey ahead. But tucked in the cozy folds of the night before, a secret memory slept quietly in Pikachu's heart. A midnight snack, a sleeping Meowth, and a moment of peace under the stars. As morning crept in, not with a roar, but with a whisper, the forest slowly started to blink its eyes open. A few sleepy hoot-hoot gave one last whoo before retreating to their nooks in the trees, and rays of sunlight filtered softly through the canopy like sleepy fingers, pulling back the curtains. The world was waking up, but doing it politely. Ash sat up with a groggy yawn, rubbing his eyes and looking around with that classic half-awake confusion, like he wasn't totally sure where he was or how he got there. Pikachu stretched beside him, letting out a squeaky little pick-ah, and giving the most innocent look in the history of innocent looks. Ash raised an eyebrow. "You sleep okay, buddy?" he asked. Pikachu nodded with a smile so wide it practically squeaked. If he had a tiny bib that read, "I regret nothing," this would have been the moment to wear it. Torchic was already pecking at some embers in the fire pit, probably wondering why breakfast hadn't been delivered to its beak yet. Meowth sat upright against a rock, holding what remained of his mysterious berry find and staring at it like it had personally betrayed him in a dream. He sniffed the air once, then squinted at Pikachu. "You..." Meowth started, then trailed off. "Nah. Must have been a dream." He turned his head, pretending like the stolen midnight snack wasn't on his mind. But the narrowed eyes he gave Pikachu when Ash wasn't looking? Oh, they said it all. There would be payback someday. Maybe in the form of a strategically placed banana peel. Or perhaps a berry decoy filled with mashed broccoli. The war of wits had begun. Pikachu, meanwhile, was lounging on Ash's lap, looking up at the sky with a smile. The mission had been a success. Not just the snack, but the whole adventure. He'd made it through the dark, dodged suspicious snorers, escaped with treasure, and returned home like a seasoned explorer. Except his reward wasn't gold or glory. It was a full belly, a warm blanket, and a place to belong. As the group started packing up their little campsite, Ash whistled a soft tune and began folding his blanket. Brock stirred the fire into life for one last round of tea, and Misty, hair still wild from sleep, wandered over with a yawn and her water bottle in hand. "Anyone else feel like something happened last night?" she asked, half suspicious, half asleep. "Just dreams." Brock shrugged. "We all needed the rest." But Pikachu tilted his head slightly and looked toward the forest path they'd arrived from, the one now bathed in soft light and morning birdsong. Somewhere out there, a twig still carried his paw prints. A leaf still rustled from his tiny leap. And maybe, just maybe, a berry tree was missing one plump, midnight-ripe fruit. Not everything had to be remembered to be real. Not every story needed to be told out loud to matter. And not every hero needed a crowd to cheer them on. Sometimes, the quiet ones, the small adventures, the sleepy missions under the moon, were the ones that stayed with you the longest. And with one last stretch, Pikachu hopped onto Ash's shoulder as they prepared to hit the road again. Another path, another town, another memory waiting to be made. The sun warmed their backs as the forest behind them whispered a soft goodbye. The campsite faded behind a bend in the road, and with it, the tiniest, coziest midnight snack saga came to a close. But don't worry. Pikachu had already started planning his next late-night adventure. He had a nose for berries, and an appetite for mischief. And there we are, sleepyhead, right back where we started. After 2 whole hours of forgotten adventures, surprise lullabies, slowpoke mysteries, and stargazing festivals, it's safe to say. We've had quite a cozy little journey tonight. Maybe you made it, through every story wide awake, eyes twinkling like Jigglypuff's microphone. Or maybe, just maybe, you nodded off halfway, through Brock's romantic guitar solo. And that's totally okay. That was kind of the whole point, wasn't it? Whether you drifted off in a Lola under swaying palm trees, or somewhere between a sleepy slowpoke village and Professor Oak's midnight tea party. Thank you for letting me be your guide through this world of gentle memories and pixelated dreams. These old Pokémon episodes, these soft little side adventures, they're like a warm blanket of nostalgia, stitched together with campfires, muddy shoes and pokeballs that sometimes miss on purpose. And no matter how many years pass, they still feel like home. You know, there's something magical about revisiting the stories we forgot, small, quiet moments that didn't get headlines or cliffhangers. No gym battles, no legendaries, just friends being friends, Pokémon being Pokémon, and naps being absolutely unavoidable. These moments may not have changed the world, but somehow they change us, even if it's just helping us sleep a little easier tonight. If you're still awake, hi, you're amazing. And maybe a little resistant to lullabies, which is a powerful life skill. I'd love to know which of tonight's stories brought back the warmest memories for you. Was it Misty's missing fishing rod, the sleepy garden Brock forgot to tell anyone about, or our old pal Jigglypuff, marker at the ready, delivering bedtime justice one face at a time? Let me know in the comments, especially if you're watching from a cozy corner of the world I haven't heard of yet. This little sleepy community continues to grow. And it honestly blows my mind how many of us are out here just looking for a safe, gentle place to unwind. A soft voice, some peaceful memories, and maybe a few slowpokes waddling by. So wherever you're watching from, whether it's 3 a.m. in London, 9 p.m. in New York, or breakfast time in a part of the world where bedtime stories come with toast, thank you for being here. You belong. If you're already dreaming by now, sweet dreams, trainer. May your pillows be fluffier than a swablu, and your dreams filled with sparkling waterfalls, and too many snacks from the Pokémon. And if you're still here and this helped you relax, I'd love if you could give the video a gentle little thumbs up, just a tiny one, like Pikachu-sized. It helps more sleepy wanderers find us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, no pressure, but I'll keep a poke ball warm for you just in case. We've got more sleepy stories coming soon, because the Pokémon world is big, weird, and full of hidden naps waiting to happen. All right, that's it for me tonight. I'll see you next time with more warm memories, soft sounds, and maybe a slowpoke or two who still haven't noticed the day change. Until then, lights low, blankets tucked, and as always, sleep well, dream deep, and stay cozy, my fellow trainers. Good night.